Okay, hi. So I read a new release every month for a year and I want to talk about it. So I did this as a part of the challenge, the hardest reading challenge. So I did this as a part of the hardest reading challenge you'll ever do. I'll link all the information for that below. It started in July of last year, and so now it's on to year 2. It's become a very large booktube, authortube project that a lot of people have gotten involved in with a ton of challenges. And this is the one challenge that I really committed to for the most part. And I want to chat about it because I'm not generally a front list reader. And in the past, when I've done this, the experience has been that I've read a lot of mid books or books that I just didn't enjoy. So I thought it would be a good idea or a good time to challenge myself on this. So I'm going to go through all of the books I read, talk about them hopefully very quickly, and then talk about some reflections on what I noticed with my reading, how it went overall, and what I can take into my reading into the future. So it started in July of last year. I read The Spellshop by Sarah Beth Durst. This is a fantasy romance, but it's not the action-packed type, it's much more cozy. Your protagonist you follow is a librarian, and you start with her fleeing the town that she's in, and with her best friend who is a spider plant, and they end up on an island, which happens to be the island that she grew up on, and she kind of integrates into the town as an adult, and it's kind of about that experience. It has found family elements to it. Overall, I found it a really enjoyable read, and definitely my type of fantasy romance. I made a video about fantasy romance that I'll link. The next month, I read Upscaled. This is a self-pub book. It is also a cozy fantasy, and which is interesting because I see that more as a winter vibe, but these were summer releases. This reads more for younger audiences, and it follows two young children, a brother and a sister, who find a dragon egg, which they're supposed to be illegal, and dragons are supposed to be illegal, and there's a quest element to find a place that they didn't think existed, and there's ties into their uncle who's been missing for years. Overall, I didn't enjoy this one. I thought it could do with a little bit more editing, and it kind of hits the line of cozy fantasy that I don't really love, where it kind of gets like kitschy and over the top with its with the joking and the cheesiness. It tended to go too far in that direction for me personally. So for September, I read So Thirsty by Rachel Harrison. This is a thriller, but also has romance elements, but also some horror-ish energy. It takes place in upstate New York in winter, which is where I live, and you're following this woman who's in kind of like a relationship she doesn't really love, and she ends up going on a girls trip with her best friend who she doesn't see very often, and they meet some vampires, and it's really about being a new vampire, but it's also about old female friendship dynamics and what that could look like over time. But there's like kind of a lot of hijinks, and yeah, then there's like some romantic elements to it that's kind of blending in with the thriller energy, which I've been seeing a lot more in books lately. So overall, I thought it was fun, but I thought it was fun, fast-paced. If you like vampire novels, it's like the kind of vampire novel I prefer, which I have another video about vampire novels that I had a lot of fun making, but overall wasn't like my favorite. In September, I also read The Third Gilmore Girl. This is written by Kelly Bishop, who is the grandmother in Gilmore Girls. I've watched Gilmore Girls multiple times all the way through, so for me, it was something that I wanted to pick up. I've read, I can't think of her name, but Lorelai's memoir as well. And this wasn't just about her being a Gilmore Girl. She really talks about her whole career, which I did not know much about. Overall, it just has the normal elements of a celebrity memoir where they might be talking through their life, but it doesn't go into anything super intense or super deep. But I always love when the actual author reads it, because you get their tone, you get their pacing, you get their personality really comes through more when they're reading their book. For October, I read American Rapture by C.J. Leede. This one I picked up because I had read C.J. Leede's previous book, Mayfly, which was a body horror novel that was very hyperbolic, which I really enjoyed. This is quite a different energy, but it's still a horror. It's more of a dystopian or apocalyptic, I guess, where there is this virus that is catching very easily, and it turns people into like sex zombies. I thought this was gonna be in a more fun way, but it really means like zombies, like you have no brain anymore and they're just having sex and fucking anything. So there's like violence involved in this, and it leads to a lot of really uncomfortable situations. You're following a teenager. I think she's 16 and she grew up in a very pious household. She's just coming to terms with like her own body and like accounting for the fact that like she is a sexual being while this is happening. It's not a apocalyptic novel where they stay in one place. They're trying to escape into areas where this pandemic has not yet infiltrated, and she meets different characters along the way. Overall, I didn't dislike this book. It definitely wasn't what I was expecting, and I preferred Mayfly to this novel. In November, I read The Teller of Small Fortunes. This is another cozy fantasy, and one of my other books that I didn't really like as much. This is like more of like a quest sort of novel. There's a lot of movement. The Teller of Small Fortunes, she kind of travels a lot, and then there's found family elements where more people kind of start coming together and they start traveling together, and then a quest element becomes involved in that. Again, with Upscaled, it lent itself a little too much into the cheesiness. I didn't really enjoy the quest novel elements. I kind of just liked when it was a slow-paced, cozy fantasy novel, and then when it tried to have more quest sort of elements in it, it kind of felt like someone was showing me their D&D campaign instead of like getting inspiration from D&D. If that makes sense. So overall, I didn't really enjoy this, and this was, I think right in here, we're ending with the books that I did not enjoy as much. So this is where I kind of actually failed when it comes to the hardest reading challenge you'll ever do, but I was never really trying to totally complete it. I was completing it in a way where it was bringing me joy, and in December, I just could not find a book that sounded interesting to me. I was searching and searching and searching like I did every month. I would have been reading a book to read a book, and I made the decision that I was not going to do that to myself, so I skipped December. I read The House of My Mother by Shari Franke. This is a nonfiction about Shari Franke, who is Ruby Franke's daughter, who was one of the kids in 8 Passengers, the YouTube family vlogging channel. And I won't get into all the details of that there, but there's a lot of dark things, child abuse that came out later, and she speaks to in this book. I made a whole video about this book. I really enjoyed it. I have a lot of personal criticisms about family vlogging channels and the lack of protections for children in that space. And she really addresses this and advocates for protection of children in those spaces now. And overall, I really enjoyed this book. Next one I read was An Honored Vow, which was the last book in a romantasy quartet. I don't have much to say. I binged the first 3 books about a year ago when I was trying to determine if I would like romantasy. Spoiler, I don't really, and I just needed to finish the series to see how it ended. I don't really remember it. It was very forgettable overall. So I guess this is another one that I didn't enjoy, but I also didn't really expect to enjoy it. I was just being a completionist. Next is Adrift, In Currents, Clean and Clear. This is the most recent release from the Wayward Children series. In this, you are following a protagonist, not really when she's in the portal worlds, but before she makes it to the portal world. So she grew up in Russia, and you're watching in an orphanage, and you watch her life there, her connection to the turtles and the other children, and then her adoption into the United States and the challenges she faces with that. And you don't really get the portal elements that exist within some of the other books. You also are not in the school. It's much more of like a, I want to say preamble, but that's not the right word. Not prologue. It'll come to me or it won't. I enjoyed this one enough, but overall, some of them are more of hits, some of them are more of misses. This one landed somewhere in the middle for me. But I'll keep reading them because they're short and enjoyable. In February, I read The Lamb by Lucy Rose. This is a horror novel, and it is about a young girl who lives with her mother in a rural area, and they eat people. And then a new woman comes into the life and the dynamics change. If you don't like body horror, don't read this. But overall, I really enjoyed it. I thought that the ending of it was really powerful and wrapped everything up really well. And I think that this is a debut, but I would be curious to read more books by this author in the future. And then I read another February read, which is Greenteeth by Molly O'Neill. This is a fantasy book that I see described as cozy, but I personally wouldn't consider it cozy as much. I would say it's just a little bit more linear and straightforward of a novel. It's definitely not epic by any means. You're following a kind of like a swamp monster. Something has invaded the town, and she befriends a human, and they go on a quest together with this other creature that she has known for years, and she's never really left her lake before. So there's lots of elements of a kind of straightforward quest novel. There's relationship dynamics, kind of learning dynamics between different species, and then her trying to come to terms with her identity, even though she's hundreds, if not thousands of years old. I found this book rather forgettable when I look back on it. I can't really remember much of it. But at the time when I read it, I didn't really dislike it, and I didn't really super enjoy it. I also read this one for February, but I kind of did it in 45 days instead of the month, the 30 days from publishing, which was what you were supposed to do for this challenge. But it is Hungerstone by Kat Dunn. This is a retelling, new take of Carmilla. It doesn't really have as much of the sapphic energy, if I recall correctly. And everyone's kind of aged up. The Carmilla figure is aged up. The protagonist is instead a older woman who never bore children with her husband. It still takes place, it seems, in the same-ish time era. And then she goes to his other estate with him that he bought, and that's where they meet the Carmilla figure, and things ensue. For me, enjoyable enough. Now moving on to the March, I read 2 books. I read The River Has Roots, which is a fantasy novella. It's about twin girls who sing a lot, and that singing was involved in the audiobook, which definitely made for a different and interesting experience. And one of them's love story with a kind of fae sort of creature from the other world. There's something that happens about halfway through that I really wasn't expecting, and you kind of see the fallout of that unexpected event. It was very quiet, but I found very powerful. Overall, I enjoyed the read. And then I read Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. The word I couldn't find earlier was prequel, and this is a prequel to The Hunger Games, where you're following the 50th Hunger Games, the second quarter quell in which Haymitch won. There's moments within the original trilogy that talk about his story. I kind of felt sometimes like this was a fanfic where it was like getting the gang back together, but in reverse because it's a prequel. But by the end, I was sold on the story and really liked like the last 25% of the book and where it ended up, and the kind of story and twist on the narrative that she was sharing with us. I preferred it much more to The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which I didn't like at all, and I thought it added something to the world. April, I read No More Tears. This is a nonfiction about Johnson & Johnson and all of the things that they've done, that they've covered up, that have been negatively impactful to hundreds of thousands of people through different ailments that have been caused by issues with their products and sometimes known issues with their products. I could go on and on and on about this book, but I'm going to keep it brief and say that I loved it. And if you like books like these, then I would give this a try. For May, I read Decolonizing Language and Other Revolutionary Ideas. I was already planning on reading a Ngugi book this year, but then I saw that this was releasing and I decided to pick it up. This isn't really what I expected based off of the title. In part 1, he talks about decolonizing language and it's much more philosophical in nature. And then in part 2, which is the longer part of the book, he's talking about different important figures to the evolution of African literature and that he knew in real life, and kind of giving voice to their stories and his interactions with them. Overall, I thought it was all right. He actually just passed away after this book came out. That perspective on the rest of his story is lost now that he's passed gave this book a little bit more power for me, because he's telling these stories that elsewise wouldn't be out there and giving permanency to them, which I appreciated more. I haven't read any of his fiction, so I'm looking forward to reading that now that I kind of have embraced his ideology. And the last month, June, I read of Monsters and Mainframes, which is a sci-fi. It takes place on a ship, and you're following a ship protagonist and other AI within the ship over the course of like many, many years through different issues that have happened. So it's kind of about space and AI, and it all takes place on this one ship, but it's also about monsters. And it kind of has that blend of fantasy elements with it. This is a book that I enjoy more in retrospect. At times it felt a little slow, and the pacing kind of felt like a bunch of short stories mashed together. At the beginning, it started to become more of a narrative towards the end. But I thought it was fun, and it really wasn't like anything I had ever read before, so for that I appreciated it. So now I want to talk through some patterns I noticed with this reading. So first I want to do a genre breakdown. 7 of the books were fantasy, which isn't really surprising to me because a majority of my reading is fantasy at this point. The next one is nonfiction. There were 4 nonfictions, which again is not that surprising to me. I've really been in a nonfiction kick over the past year, so especially since January, I read a ton of nonfiction outside of even what I talked about here. So that's not really surprising to me either. The next one, I tagged 3 of them as horror. I was looking at a particular upcoming horror list when I was looking for books to read. So I think that's more why more horror was incorporated into my reading than I think usual. And then I read 2 dystopians and 1 sci-fi, though there were fantasy elements too, so you could really like put that into the fantasy category. Overall, I think that this is like pretty comparable to my normal reading. So I was still picking up a lot of different genres and book types, but it was still aligned with my normal reading tastes. I also kind of want to talk through if I would have read these books if it weren't for the challenge. So I think that I would have definitely read Sunrise on the Reaping and the Seanan McGuire book. If I heard about the Shari Franke book, I would have probably picked that up as well because I followed the case on 8 Passengers and Ruby Franke, and when I heard that there was another perspective out there, I wanted to read it. A lot of these books I learned about because of this reading experience. So I don't even necessarily know that I would have known about a lot of these books had I not been doing a bunch of research every single month to find books to read for this. And so I think the answer to that is no. I also think that even if I had found some of these books, I wouldn't necessarily have read them. There was like this momentum that I felt while I was doing this challenge where I did a bunch of research. I put a bunch of these books on hold at my library or on a notification setting so I would know when they got a copy of it. And then immediately when they came through for me, I would pick it up and read it. And I generally usually don't do that. So I was kind of striking while the iron was hot. And if I don't do that, I may never end up picking up a book. So there is a good chance that I just would not have gotten to a lot of these books unless I saw a lot of hype about them later, which most of them I honestly haven't. Though that's not to say hype doesn't exist, more just I haven't been involved in the hype if it has. I think too, while I talked about the ones that I didn't really like, there were some really big successes for me. No More Tears was shocking and exactly the type of book I love. So I don't think I would have immediately seen this book or known about this book if I hadn't been doing this reading experience. And so for that, I'm really appreciative. I probably would have eventually read the Shari Franke book if I had heard of it, but I found out that it was releasing because of this experience. Okay, what did I learn? Keeping up with new releases is a lot of work. Kudos to the people who do it because I had to seek out these releases in a lot of different settings. I would watch YouTube videos. I would find blogs with lists on them. I would try to go to different publisher websites to see what was coming out. For me, that was a new experience. The last time I had been picking up releases as they were coming out, I would just walk into my library and see what they had around. And that was not as successful for me. Though I will say when I was doing that, it was right when I got out of college. I wasn't really acquainted with my reading tastes as well. I think that I understand them a lot better now, so that made it more successful. Another way that this was a lot of work was that I don't purchase my books very often. I say that in front of a full thing of shelves, but like, to be completely frank, about 90% of these books I bought used. So you're not finding new books at used bookstores. So I was heavily utilizing my library. Most of my reading is audio now, so I was trying to get the audiobooks. I live in the state of New York where I have access to the Brooklyn Public Library through Libby, and that made this so much easier to do because they get tons of copies of books and people tend to go through them pretty quickly when they first release. I was also using Spotify a ton for this because you get 15 hours a month if you have a premium plan, and they tend to have a decent number of new releases available. So I was utilizing both of those, but it was kind of work to see if I would be able to get one. In some cases, I had to go and get physical copies from my library. So I think that I also don't get ARCs, so that didn't give me any favors here. But overall, if you're doing this in type of experiment and you're not a book influencer or don't have a channel or something, you'd be kind of going through it in the same way that I was. I think that makes it a lot harder to keep up with these if you're not willing to pay or don't want to pay, $35 a pop for a book for a hardcover, which I'm not doing. And then, this, I kind of want to talk about if this detracted from my other reading. For me, it didn't, because I read a decent amount. So this is one of my primary hobbies. But I will say that this is something where I've learned about myself personally that I could really only have like 2 to 3 projects going at once. So I started this in July of last year. During that time, I was doing other projects. I was like reading a bunch of romantasy, seeing if I'm a romantasy reader. I read a lot of vampire books to see if I could find vampire books I like. And once I started in January my Reading Africa project, those other projects went away because I was balancing my Reading Africa project with this frontlist project. So I think that it didn't detract from my reading, but personally I can only have 2 projects really going at a time for me to be successful at them and really enjoy the reading experience still and not make it feel like work, which is why the hardest reading challenge you'll ever do is fun for me in terms of like coming up with prompts for my reading, and I have inspiration and want to make other videos tailored around some of those prompts, but I can never participate in it the way that a lot of people are doing, where they're really trying to complete the challenge. I guess maybe I can talk about looking into the future, like how this is going to impact my future reading. I think that we'll see if it tapers off, but right now I'm still it's become a habit almost. Now I've already tagged a few books in July that are coming out that I want to read. I've put some of them on hold at the library. So I kind of like the notion of like finding a book, immediately being interested in it, and almost immediately picking it up and keeping that momentum going. I'm still seemingly going to do that, and I'm not sure if that'll taper, but I do have some upcoming reads that would have fit this challenge, though I will not be forcing myself to do it any longer. It was a good foray, and we'll see how much it influences my reading in the years to come. But I would love to know if you guys also read frontlist books or would ever want to participate in an experiment like this. Or if you've read any really great releases that came out in the past year that I should know about. I think you might have a good sense of my reading taste from this challenge. That is all I have, so until next time, happy reading.